Yeah. 6th birthday. It's my intention, and still would be my intention were it to be moved, to vote against the government's amendment. I appreciate my right honourable friend, the Chief Whip's efforts to find a way through. He is somebody we are lucky to have in his role. Yeah. However, we were at risk of making a mistake. The original motion is perfectly acceptable and allows for much of the spirit of the amendment. For example, the publication of the Grey Report would be automatic upon the conclusion of the Metropolitan Police's work. There was no need to complicate matters. The Ukraine situation is of huge importance, but the invasion of a sovereign nation by a dictatorial aggressor should not be a reason why we should accept lower standards ourselves. I have told the Prime Minister to his face that I think he is doing a good job robustly supporting the Ukrainian government, and Her Majesty's government, along with our nation, can be proud of their role and generosity. Let us give credit where credit is due. However, much as though I may have tried, I cannot reconcile myself to the Prime Minister's continued leadership of our country and the Conservative Party. I say this by means of context, so that everyone, particularly my constituents and colleagues, can understand my position, without hiding my views with ever more elaborate disguises. To those constituents who disagree with me, I appreciate their anger, just as I can the anger of colleagues. However, say what you mean and mean what you say. I submitted my letter of no confidence to our honourable friend, the member for Altrincham and Sale West, in December of last year. I did so for the following reason. It followed the leak of the Allegra Stratton mock press conference video. In that video, I believe she did nothing wrong. She nervously laughed and sought to make light of an embarrassing situation. To see her crying on her doorstep, feeling the full weight of responsibility and anger of a country, was deeply moving. And I felt immensely sorry for her. And I say this, I hope that she is well and that she will be able to continue her distinguished career. But what alarmed me most was later that evening, a press preview of the winter COVID Plan B measures brought forward to try to move matters on. Now, we debated those measures at length, but we can agree, perhaps not on their extent or their importance, but they nonetheless sought to compel or restrict what people in this country could do. I therefore thought to myself, if a government was prepared to bring such measures forward earlier in order to distract from its own embarrassment, that the Prime Minister was no longer fit to govern. I care deeply about my colleagues. I know that a number are struggling at the moment. We have been working in a toxic atmosphere. The parliamentary party bears the scars of misjudgments of leadership. There can be few colleagues on this side of the House, I would contend, who are truly enjoying being members of Parliament at the moment. It is utterly depressing to be asked to defend the indefensible. Each time, part of us withers. Now, I have questioned my place in this party in recent months, and perhaps that's symptomatic of a swathe of our voters in the country. But I tell them firmly, I'm not going anywhere. And I urge them to stick with us at the forthcoming elections. But for us to maintain their trust and confidence, we must be seen to do the right thing. It is our responsibility. It is the Conservative Parliamentary Party's responsibility. We must stop delegating and delaying our political judgment. We each only have our own limited and imperfect integrity. We can't keep spending it on others who we cannot be sure will not let us down. Now, I have great empathy for all of those who worked at Number 10 and in the Cabinet Office. They bore an immense burden and worked in the most intense pressure. They worked hard and they made sacrifices. And I also extend that same empathy to my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, who knows more than most the personal challenges and personal battles that came from the pandemic. But the matter before us is one at the heart of this institution, of our Parliament. I love this place, believing it to be a place of high ideals and purpose. What is said here matters. Quite apart from the Facebook clips about roundabouts and drains in our constituencies, or indeed the confected anger to wind people up, it should be a place venerated by those of us given the singular honour of being sent here. Yeah. Now, of course, it can be a pantomime, a farce, turgidly boring, obscure, but it should always be reasonably honest. And it is for that, I hope not naive principle, that I cannot support the amendment, and I will vote for the main motion.
Come on, Mr. MacDonald, you've been here longer than most people. Chris Bryant.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I warmly commend the honourable member for Hazel Grove on the speech that he did. I think he did it with great courage and honesty, and frankly with the integrity that I think a lot of us have seen him show in his chairmanship of the committee. And I think that this House knows that select committees and the chairing of select committees is not always easy, because quite often people come to select committee meetings with fixed views. They're not all that interested in the evidence that is presented to them. And they resolutely hold the same view afterwards that they held at the beginning of the meeting, even though everything has been proved to be quite the opposite of what they thought. But I know from those who sit on his committee that he listens to the evidence and he is a very good parliamentarian as chair of the committee. I thought it all got a bit religious earlier, and I felt I was back at theological college. Being the only person, I think, in the House who can actually pronounce absolution on anybody, I thought I was suddenly going to get a new job. But can I just start by saying I want to warmly also commend the work that the Chief Whip has done this week, because I think he has got us today into a much better place than the House would have been if he hadn't made the decisions that he, doubtless advised by others, has made today. I had not expected to speak in this debate. I'll be very straight with the House, if you see what I mean, which is that it is sometimes very difficult being chair of the Committee on Standards and Privileges, because you get asked to comment on literally every single member of the House at some point. Yeah. I am absolutely scrupulous in making sure that I never comment in public or in private on anything that might possibly come to either of the committees. I didn't think this matter would come to the Privileges Committee, which is why I commented on it. And consequently, I think it's quite right that I recused myself. I will not take part in the deliberations of the committee on this matter if the motion goes through in any shape or form. I think I could have done it fairly. I chaired the Standards Committee when we had the Prime Minister before us on a different matter, and we found that we disagreed with the Commission, and we found in the Prime Minister's favour. But I understand that the House needs to know absolutely for certain that the process will be fair. And so, in a strange way, that means I can actually say something today. All right.
Can I commend him for his speech and for his thorough sense of decency? But I just wonder, does he think the same principle should apply to other members of the Privileges Committee?
I will say something later about the Privileges Committee, but having recused myself, I don't think it's really for me to tell them what to do or how to behave. But the one thing I'm very keen on is I think that I passionately care about Parliament. I believe in Parliament. I believe in democracy. It's the only way that I can get change from my constituents is through the democratic process. And anything that undermines trust and confidence in Parliament damages my opportunity to do anything useful in my life at all. Which is why I always want to urge the House to be extremely careful in these matters of standards and privileges. Each generation of MPs has a special responsibility to burnish, not tarnish, the reputation of this House, because we hand democracy on to a future generation, and if we've undermined it, it may not last. I just draw to the House's attention that in this Parliament, 2 MPs have been found guilty of serious offences in a court of law, and another 2 are awaiting trial. 4 MPs have been suspended for 1 day, a minister was suspended for 7 days, and 7 MPs have been required to apologise to the House for breaches of the Code of Conduct. 3 MPs have resigned their seats in the face of convictions. The independent expert panel has suspended a member for 6 weeks for sexual harassment, made another apologise for bullying staff, and found another guilty of such terrible sexual harassment that he resigned his seat before the sanction came to the House. That is without any consideration of the matter of whether an honourable member or right honourable member has lied to the House. And it is not yet 6 months since the Owen Paterson saga, which I don't think really covered the House in glory. And in a very short period of time, 2 of our colleagues have been murdered, and others are wearing stab vests. We have to take the reputation of the House extremely seriously. Yes. Yeah. We have to burnish it, not tarnish it. I've heard ministers argue quite rightly that there has to be due process. I would say to the House that this is the due process. Yeah. It always has been the due process. When there's been a claim that either a member of the public or a member of the House might have committed a contempt of Parliament by lying to the House or breaching the confidentiality around a select committee report or whatever, the standard process is that it's sent to the Committee of Privileges, or as it used to be, the Committee of Standards and Privileges, and before that, the Committee of Privileges. So this is the due process. And I have absolute confidence in the other members of the committee that they will do a good job. They will think very carefully about, as the Right Honourable Member for Stone said, making sure that there is a fair hearing. Because the Court of Public Opinion isn't very good at providing a fair hearing, I find. The House should do a great deal better than the Court of Public Opinion. We try to uphold the rule of law. It's one of the duties for all MPs. And so I think it's particularly important that we make sure that there is a fair process, and I'm sure that the other committee members will do so. I'm not sure where that was coming from. Yes, of course, yes, the member for Wickham.
He makes a very powerful and important contribution, of course, mostly in relation to members of Parliament, but he will know occasionally somebody feels it necessary to use parliamentary privilege to say within the House things which those outside might otherwise sue for defamation over. Can he just confirm that he will consider whether we ought to have a right to reply for the public, so that if we use privilege, they've got some chance to put their side of the story?
The honourable member makes a very good point, and we've had some discussions outside the chamber about this. The difficulty is, I'm not sure that that's a matter for the Committee of Standards and Privileges. I think it is a matter for the Committee on Procedure. And I think there is a very good argument for putting something in place so that there is a right of reply. I can't go further for reasons that he may be aware of.
I don't want to open this into that area of debate. I know exactly what's going on, and I think we can leave that part of it there. Chris Bryant.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The second point I was going to make about fair process is that it's actually quite a high bar that the Committee on Privileges will have to consider. I mean, I think it is, as the Leader of the Opposition said earlier, not debated that the House was misled. I think even the Prime Minister effectively admits that the House was misled. It was said that that rules weren't broken, and it is self-evident that rules were broken. So the House was misled. It got a false impression. The question is whether that was intentional. And the committee will have to devise ways of investigating whether there was an intention. And in fact, when... Oh, well, I think I ought to give away over there first.
Gentleman for giving way. He is making an excellent and poignant speech, but does he not find it strange and deeply worrying that we seem to be in the position that the Prime Minister seemed unable or incapable of following his own rules and his own laws, yet he is using the rules of this place and the processes of this place to frustrate the course of, as one member has said, natural justice.
Chris Bryant.
Well, I would normally agree with her on these kind of things, and I sort of would have agreed with her last night, but I think we're getting to a better place now. I think, in a sense, sometimes the backbenchers persuade the front benches of a better course of action. I'm looking intently at the Chief Whip at the moment, the Government Chief Whip. Look, I was just going to say, Mr Speaker, but in one moment. As the clerk advised, in the case of whether Stephen Byers had misled the House on a single occasion in 2001, in order to find that Mr Byers committed a contempt in the evidence session for the 14th of November 2001, the committee will need to satisfy itself not only that he misled the subcommittee, but that he did so knowingly or deliberately. As I say, that is quite a high bar, but it is for the committee to decide that. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman, and then I will...
I'm very grateful
Sir
to
William
the
Cash.
gentleman. I'm grateful for the honourable gentleman, first of all, because what he's just said is what I was going to raise with him, because the actual requirement under the Ministerial Code does say that it is open to a minister to correct any inadvertent error at the earliest opportunity. Ministers who knowingly mislead Parliament will be expected to offer their resignation to the Prime Minister. The question is knowingly, and I'm very grateful to him for making that point clear.
Well, I think he's agreeing with me, so I will agree with him.
Leave it at that.
And the only difference I would have with him is that he was talking about the Ministerial Code. The Ministerial Code is for the Prime Minister. This House adjudicates on its rules, its code of conduct, and contempt of Parliament. So they're different matters. This is about upholding a simple principle around making sure that ministers speak honestly. I would say one other thing about the committee. It is very important that the 6 members of the committee are not pressurised by anybody. Yeah. Members may not be aware, but the Attorney General and the Solicitor General are able to attend those meetings, are able to take part in the deliberations, but not allowed to move amendments or vote. But it's very important that the committee is able to do its business without being lent on by anyone. Yeah. And then the final point I'd make, Mr Speaker, is why I think all of this is important is because I care far more about what's happening in Ukraine and on the cost of living crisis than about this. Far more. I've got constituents who are in tears about their finances at the moment. They have absolutely no idea how they're going to pay their bills, how they're going to pay the rent, how they're going to find school uniforms and things like that. They are in tears. And all of us have seen the horror in Ukraine. I've been speaking for a very long time. I said in 2014 that if we didn't take Putin far more seriously, if we didn't impose far more stricter sanctions in 2014, he would end up coming for the rest of Ukraine. Yeah. So I care far more about those things than I do particularly about this motion today. But they're not alternatives. Exactly. I would argue it may be in coming months that the Prime Minister will have to come to this House and say, we're going to have to change our strategy on Russia. We may have to consider offensive weaponry. We may have to consider British troops being put in a place of danger. Similarly, the Prime Minister may have to come to this House and say, I have to ask the British people to make further sacrifices because the economy is in a very difficult place and the public finances are in a very difficult place. You need, at a moment of national and international crisis, a leader of completely and utterly unimpeachable moral authority. I don't think we have that at the moment. I don't think we have that by a long chalk. But that's why these two things are intimately connected and not separate. It's why I believe this must be referred to the Committee on Privileges.